Hi everybody. So today I would like to review Mapping the Interior by Stephen Graham Jones. And here's a picture of the cover. Hopefully you can see it, maybe. You can see it's a really nice cover. It was published by Tor Books. And it's hard to tell from the cover. When I first looked at the cover, it looked like it might be something like sci-fi. But then as you look closer, you see it is a pretty good depiction. I just wasn't paying close attention, unfortunately. Um, so I actually did a first review video of this a while ago, but I didn't like what I said about it, so I decided to try and redo it. And my second attempt at trying to review this is probably not any better, unfortunately. It's a great book. It really is a really great story. It's a shorter story. It's a novella, and it's by Stephen Graham Jones, who, as I've said before, has quickly become one of my favorite writers. He writes these wonderful stories. A lot of his characters are Native American, and they're set. The stories are set in the modern day, and he writes about families. And I really like that aspect of it because I've always liked stories about families. I don't know if it's because my own family's so screwed up or if it's just because I have this. I don't know. It's just one of those things. Like a lot of my favorite movies are about families. They look at the different family structure. And the other thing I like about Stephen Graham Jones is that he looks at a lot of the experiences of Native American people, and rather than putting them into stereotypes, he does take aspects of the culture and puts them into a modern perspective where what's left of the culture is sort of hanging on in this landscape that's just completely forgotten about them. So in this case, the story is about a young man. He's 12 years old. His name's Junior. And it's actually written from the perspective of an adult Junior looking back at this time in his life. And when he was 12, he was sleepwalking. So that right there is sort of an indication that there's something not quite right with this poor kid. And he saw his father's spirit cross through the trailer. Whoop. Sorry, pulled that right off. Remind me not to talk with my hands. So he saw his father's spirit walk through the living space and so the first thing that I found was really cool about this was that his dad was what they call a fancy dancer, and I just like saying fancy dancer. And the term fancy dancer is evocative. Like when I was a kid, we would have Native studies courses, and because I grew up in a city that is very close to a reserve, we got to go and sometimes watch the powwows. And I didn't know that these guys with the feathers and the beads and everything, that these dancers actually kind of had a name and a history and so on. So I had to look into it, and if you want something really interesting, look up the history of these fancy dancers because they do it competitively. And so Junior talks about how his father did some of this, but he was never really very good at it. So he has this idea that his father's spirit is trying to become stronger to become this, what he could never be in life. And Junior's brother starts having seizures, and so it's hard to explain what happens because Junior's a very unreliable narrator. And I mean, the basic story, spoilers ahead, is that Junior skips school, his brother has a seizure, he hides, Junior hides underneath where the foundation of their modular home is, gets attacked by dogs. Something happens and the dogs are all kind of ripped to pieces. He thinks his dad did it. Pretty sure he had some kind of psychotic break and he did it. So the neighbor comes after him. And the neighbor gets arrested, but then the next night the neighbor's out. In the meantime, because Dino, Junior's little brother, he's part of the special needs class. It's never really stated what the problem is, but I don't know if he's autistic or if he's if there's something else. But he does have these seizures, and the kids just bully him relentlessly. And so Junior finds a mark on his neck, and he figures out that his dad's getting stronger because he's feeding off Dino somehow. So it turns out his mother's seeing the deputy sheriff, and one night Junior is awake and the deputy sheriff's over, and he's waiting for his dad to come, and he goes out and he grabs the gun from the deputy sheriff's deputy sheriff's truck, and he sees what he thinks is his father feeding on his brother, kills him. Turns out it's the neighbor. But this is the surface stuff, but what's going on underneath is a much richer and more fantastical version of events. And I think that's what's one of the things that's really interesting about the way that the story is written, is it's not a straightforward linear narrative. Because once all this happens, Junior sort of has a break, and he goes into this sort of like time loop and confronts his father's spirit in such a way that he actually causes his father's death. Like it's like, and I know I sound really weird just trying to explain it, but so and it's a little bit confusing, but the language is really rich, and the characters are just really well drawn, even though it's told entirely from Junior's perspective. There's not a lot of characters in the book, but they're really well drawn. You have Junior, you have his brother Dino, and they're just these two little boys in a really bad situation. And then you've got his mother, who was she moved away from the reserve once when the kid's dad died, and so now she's kind of away from her whole support network. And she's a really interesting character too, because I mean, anybody that knows a single mother knows how much she has to fight just to protect her kids. And when you've got kids that have these kind of problems, it's going to just be so much worse for the mother. And I think, again, coming from a background of poverty and single motherhood and so on, I really, really felt for this woman. Even though she's a side character in the whole thing, and Junior is the main character, the family is drawn in such a sympathetic way that I really just appreciated their whole story. So eventually, things get resolved, and Junior grows up, and he actually grows up to be a fancy dancer himself. So I just really like saying fancy dancer. I'm sorry. I find it interesting the way that. Sorry. I did have to go and look up what fancy dancers do and what the whole thing is about, and I recommend doing a little bit of research about that too. I mean, even if you just like pretty costumes, like these guys dancing is absolutely amazing. So anyway, that's my not very good review about a somewhat confusing story, but it's great. Stephen Graham Jones is always awesome to read. It's an entertaining, really interesting, rich story. The thing that I think suffers is that the narrative thread is a little bit loose, and because Junior's an unreliable narrator, the plot gets lost in Junior kind of trying to figure things out. And I think that it would have been better as a short story. I know that sounds really strange, but novellas always suffer either there's too much and they should have been a short story, or there's not enough and they should have been a novel. This is one of those stories that I think could have benefited from being shorter. But that's my personal opinion, doesn't really matter or anything. But Mapping the Interior by Stephen Graham Jones, well worth a read. Well worth going and researching fancy dancers and what that part of the culture is all about. Because, like I said, it's like pretty costumes and great dancing and and I didn't know that they do this kind of thing competitively either. It's like a sport. So I'll give it 4.5 out of 5 stars. And sorry it's taken me so long. I've had the month from hell. I mean, I had a hearing with my landlord. I had all kinds of nonsense come up, and it's just been not a good month. So hopefully, it is Boxing Day today. Hopefully I can get a couple more reviews out of the way before the end of the year. But in the meantime, hope you're reading lots of great horror. Have a great day.